I will enter his gates with thanksgiving in my heart. I will enter his courts with praise. I will say this is the day that the Lord has made. I will rejoice, for he has made me glad.
Let me hear you say it.
Gospel lesson, which is Mark 13, 1 through 8. Sign of the end of age. As he was leaving the temple, one of his disciples said to him, "Look, teacher, what massive stones, what magnificent buildings. Do you see all these great buildings?" replied Jesus. "Not one stone here will be left on another. Everyone will be thrown down." As Jesus was sitting on the Mount of Olives opposite the temple, Peter, James, John, and Andrew asked him privately, "Tell us, when will these things happen, and what will be the sign that they are all about to be fulfilled?" Jesus said to them, "Watch out that no one deceives you. Many will come in my name, claiming I am he, and will deceive many. When you hear of wars and rumors of wars, do not be alarmed. Such things must happen, but the end is still to come. Nation will rise up against nation, kingdom against kingdom. There will be earthquakes in various places and famines. These are the beginnings of the birth of pains." So ends the reading.
Falling stones. If you've read the book by Dan Brown called The Lost Symbol, you know that Robert Langdon comes into Washington, D.C., the beginning of the story, and he looks up and he sees the Washington Monument looking out over the city. That monument began in 1848. There was a hiatus from 1854 to 1877, partially because of the Civil War, and then was completed in 1884. For a while, it was the tallest man-made structure in the world, until the Eiffel Tower was completed in Paris, France in 1889. It still is the tallest all-stone structure in the world. And it is powerful. Big stones, strong, heavy, until something happens. In August of last year, of 2011, there was a 5.5 earthquake in Virginia, and it shook the monument. Now, some people thought this was what was going to happen. Fortunately, there was just some cracks in it. It will be closed, and those people, the last people to be able to go up into the monument until maybe 2014. Jesus is talking about this very thing. The disciples come up and say, "Aren't the walls of this temple, these great stones, aren't they something? Won't it last forever?" Josephus, a historian who had been to the temple before 70 AD, said that the gold plates that were on the temple, if they caught the sun first thing in the morning, would blind you. You know, like a flash of a strobe light. Inside, it was huge, and it was spacious. And this is a model that comes from England. A retired fellow put this together, including little people half-inch tall, in this huge model of the wondrous, marvelous temple. It was more than just a big monument. It was more than just a place to worship. It was God. Written stone. And yet Jesus said, you see all these great stones? Not one of them will stand atop another soon. It's all going to come down. And that's the way it is. It all comes down. I can't remember where I'm at. We look at the temple, and we're like the disciples. We can't imagine how something this grand, this huge, built without caterpillars and hydraulics, could possibly ever fall, and yet it does, because it's part of this world. Everything we create will come down, even ourselves. We live in a time and a space where there are beginnings, and everything that has a beginning has an end. We are lucky to be here, you understand. This is not saying it's a bad world. It's just that we get focused on the wrong thing. I think the disciples had their eyes slightly blinded by the flash of light off all that gold. Or they had what I call spiritual macular degeneration. My mom has that. And she gets around pretty good because she just walks where she's not seeing. She just walks where she can't see. It's tough because it's just a big blank spot in the middle of her vision. And things like reading and handiwork are just impossible, which she misses a lot. But I'm talking about spiritual macular degeneration, when we look at the holy and all we see is a big blank spot, and somehow we get this pestering peripheral vision of something more out on the edge of our lives, and we're not sure what it is. And God wants us to be able to see how many of the scriptures, how many of the stories in the gospel stories are about Jesus giving sight to the blind. This is not just about blind people a long time ago. This is about a blindness the disciples and all of us have. We get into life, we get busy with life, we spend an hour in church, maybe 2, maybe 4, but otherwise we're on the periphery. It's on the periphery of our lives, and we've got to do our jobs, and we've got to get things done, we've got our families to worry about, and we forget about the centrality of God. God is everywhere. And Jesus was trying to wake us up and wake the disciples up. He goes to the temple. That whole week, that's Holy Week, this happened. In Holy Week, he goes to the temple. First of all, he rides in on a donkey, and everybody's cheering. The disciples are cheering, and yet they cannot see what's going on. And the next morning, he finds this fig tree that doesn't have any fruit, and they don't understand what he's trying to say. And he goes into the temple and he faces all comers. He takes on all of the complaints, the questions about, well, what authority do you do this? And now, if this so-called resurrection happens, who is that woman going to be married to? And should we pay money to Caesar, taxes to Caesar, or not? And finally, what is the greatest commandment? And he answers them all. And then when they get out and they say that that's such a wonderful temple, and he says it's going to all fall down, Peter, James, John, and Andrew sidle up to him and says, Master, tell us what the signs are going to be for this to happen. Signs? What signs are there? Hadn't they seen the signs? Hadn't they spent the week with him as he showed them the signs that God's presence was real? This is not Jesus prognosticating. This is not Jesus predicting some terrible calamity like December 22nd, 2012. This is Jesus opening our eyes to the presence of God in everything we do and see and hear. God is in the midst of it. God is in the midst of us and all of these wonders of our lives. are not to be worshipped for themselves. They are what J.R.R. Tolkien called sub-creations. He wrote the Lord of the Rings trilogy, and he invented this Middle Earth, but he would not take credit for it. He said, I sub-created it with God. God created me, I created this world of the imagination, and it is God's world as well, as I have interpreted. In fact, he wrote a poem to his friend, C.S. Lewis, before C.S. Lewis converted to Christianity. And he says it this way, a very, very touching poem. Though now long estranged, man is not wholly lost nor wholly changed. Disgraced he may be, yet is not dethroned, and keeps the rags of lordship once he owned, his world dominion by creative act, not his to worship the great artifact. Man, sub-creator, the refracted light, through whom is splintered from a single white through many hues and endlessly combined in living shapes that move from mind to mind. Though all the crannies of the world we filled with elves and goblins, though we dared to build gods and their houses out of dark and light, and sowed the seeds of dragons, 'twas our right, used or misused. That right has not decayed. We make still by the law in which we're made. Our creativity is God's creativity through us. It is not the yet to be imagined wonders of bits and bytes that are flooding upon us. It is not in the creation of magical, mystical worlds like Middle Earth. It is not in the construction of great buildings such as the Washington Monument and the Temple. It is in God alone. Now, we are certainly okay to say, wow, that is something to look at. That is something to see, something to witness. But remember, God has put us here in a world of time and space, and the tick-tock will bring forth and dispose of all that is. It is God who has been before the beginning. It is God who will be after the end. God is the Alpha and the Omega, and we are just here somewhere in between to create and make beautiful and make lovable and to make better for God. And that's where our worship needs to be focused. Our spiritual macular degeneration needs to be brought down so that we are looking at the glory of God. For all the rest is just falling stones.
I will enter his gates with thanksgiving in my heart. I will enter his courts with praise.